In the second part of our chapter, we're going to be looking at diversity. And of course, diversity is a key contemporary and very controversial issue in organizations in the way that managers have to operate within their organizational context. And what a diversity is here defined as is it's the multitude of individual differences and similarities that exist among people. And so when we're talking about diversity, it's often easy to just talk about things like difference in gender, difference in ethnicity, even now difference in sexual orientation. But recognize that diversity has to do with all the myriad of characteristics or traits that separate us from each other and also that make us similar to each other. And that's what we need to focus on when we talk about management of diversity. And here you can actually see that diversity is much like, as the book terms, an onion. There are layers of diversity. At the very core, at the very center, is the thing that makes us the most unique, the thing that separates us from all people, and that's our personality. We're going to talk a little more about that in our following chapters. That personality is what really separates us from everybody, if you will. Uh, Moving away from personality or moving more to the external, we see the next layer is these internal dimensions. And these internal dimensions are normally things about ourselves that we cannot necessarily change and are very important to us. Beyond that is our geographic location, and then we have our functional level. So what you see is that as we move away from our core or centric layer of diversity, these are more traits or characteristics that we have chosen for ourselves, that we have decided, and oftentimes they aren't necessarily as near or as dear to us as what is in our core. And it's obviously there are things, the core is something that we cannot necessarily change. So we must be accepted the way we are because it's not something that we can easily change. One way of managing diversity or increasing the level of diversity is to impose or to implement affirmative action. Of course, you've heard that term before, but this is somewhat of a misunderstood concept. Affirmative action says is the artificial intervention aimed at giving management a chance to correct an imbalance, an injustice, a mistake, or some outright discrimination that has occurred in the past. And in this way, the organization is given the ability, managers are given the ability and the liberty to hire people, to include people that have been somewhat disenfranchised, that have not been given the opportunity before, either to be part of the organization or, in fact, to be promoted to higher levels of the organization. That's kind of what comes about from affirmative action. We're trying to essentially even the playing field. But that has obviously brought about some controversial sentiments. And also there's this argument about reverse discrimination. Now that we're trying to bring more of one race or one ethnicity or one gender in, is that in fact diminishing the opportunities for those that are not in that group? And so that's some of the questions, some of the controversy surrounding that. Well, of course, affirmative action hasn't corrected all diversity issues, and in fact, as the book discusses, it has brought about some measure of discontent by those that feel that they're being treated unfairly, the reverse discrimination, if you will. And there's still challenges, of course, that we face in terms of diversity management. For example, the woman navigating the labyrinth, it says here, breaking the glass ceiling. Although there have been greater levels of women in the workplace, there is still this perceived glass ceiling. That as a woman, I can only go that high in an organization. And at that point, I'm starting to bump my head on this glass ceiling. There's also discussion about racial groups encountering glass ceiling and perceived discrimination. So beyond just women being discriminated against, also minorities are being discriminated against in terms of being able to acquire those higher positions. Mismatch between workers' educational attainment and occupational requirements. This is really important to you as students because oftentimes managers, people within an organization will say to us, listen, yeah, we want your workers to have degrees, but we also want them to be able to be critical thinkers, to be able to have the skills and the training necessary to perform well on the job. And so education isn't necessarily always matching the needs of organizations. And of course, this difference in the aging workforce, specifically dealing with technology. You have older workers that aren't as used to technology as the younger workers, different way of thinking, different way of operating, that can cause conflict. Well, this slide here again gives us an idea of some of the major challenges and barriers that organizations are facing as they try to manage diversity. Well, one is just inaccurate stereotypes and prejudice. There are organizations and people in organizations that just have prejudicial and stereotypical responses to people, to women, minorities, to others in the organization, even to younger, older workers, that do not allow for a productive diversity experience. Ethnocentrism, we mentioned that before, and that was the belief that my culture is superior to others. Poor career planning. There might be a situation with minority or women in the workforce, whatever it is, some disenfranchised group, they don't have the opportunities that others that are more privileged do. An unsupportive and hostile work environment, meaning that diversity isn't seen as very, very important. In fact, it's seen as a necessary evil. We have to have these people here, but we don't really want them there. And the lack of political savvy on the part of diverse employees. Diverse employees, again, may not have had that social experience, that social equity, if you will, and truly understand how to maneuver their way and navigate their way through the organization, and may not have, in fact, opportunities to be mentored, and so they lack the ability to really help themselves in terms of promotion. Some other challenges, especially when it comes to women, difficulty in balancing career and family issues. Yes, I want to take care of my kids. I want to make sure that my family is well taken care of. But I also want to balance my career. I want to rise in my organization. I don't necessarily know if I can do both. Fears of reverse discrimination. Organizations, as I said, affirmative action has brought about this concern that maybe majority groups or traditional majority groups are now being discriminated against to kind of even the playing field. Diversity not seen as an organizational priority. Again, the organization does not think it's important. It doesn't think that there's any benefit to having a diverse workforce. Revamping the organization's performance and appraisal and reward system. It might have been created with a certain type of personnel in mind, and then because those demographics have changed, the performance evaluations must change as well. And just clear resistance to change. This is not what we want. This is not the kind of people we want here. This is not who we are. We don't want to change to accept this diversity. The problems or the barriers to managing diversity can be also seen in the responses or the options to diversity management that organizations choose. The first option is to include or exclude, and that really kind of comes from the affirmative action. I want to be more inclusive. I want to bring more minorities, more women, more diverse people into my workforce, and so I become inclusive. Or I essentially start excluding people from my workforce because I don't want to have that level of diversity. The second option is to basically deny that there is any kind of diversity issue here, and in fact deny the differences between people. I hear people say something, oh, I'm colorblind, I'm racially blind. Well, how is that necessarily true? You're denying the fact that there is any differences and trying hoping that it kind of goes away. The third option is to simulate, to kind of ensure that everybody who comes into the organization becomes like everybody else, follows the dominant pattern that has already been set. Again, you're somewhat ignoring their differences, and you're asking them to become like everybody else. And then the fourth option is suppression. I know you're there, but I'm not going to really focus on your differences. I'm going to, in fact, suppress those differences so that it doesn't become an obstacle. It doesn't becomes a problem later on. Some other approaches, of course, is isolation. So the person who's different, you kind of go away. We put them in somewhere that they can't cause any trouble. We just try to basically ignore that they exist and really don't have to deal with them. The sixth option is a little less inhumane, if you will, than isolation, and that's toleration. Yeah, okay, we understand you're different, we understand you're here, and we're going to just kind of accept that. But we're not going to see any benefit, or we're not going to try to leverage any benefit from your difference. We just recognize that you're different, we have to have you there, fantastic, here you are, we'll tolerate you, but we're not going to try to learn from you, and we're not going to even try to interact and build upon our differences, similarities. Option 7 just does the opposite. It tries to recognize that there is value in this diversity. There's value in having women in the workforce. There's value in having people of different religion or people of different ethnicities, because it brings a level of creativity perhaps to the organization. They try to build relationships by fostering interaction between people, because as people interact, they kind of learn about each other, learn about their histories, learn about what makes them the way they are, and that can have better commonality and community. And option 8 is that mutual adaptation. I'm willing to learn from you. You're willing to learn from me. We don't see anybody as being dominant and superior here. We are trying to learn from each other, and that's that mutual adaptation. We're willing to change because we need to change. And of course, you'll tend to see the options of 7 and 8, even 6, being better than options 1, 2, 3, 4, and